This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by The Athletic. Premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
A full preview of the upcoming NCAA tournament, including some tips you'll want to know before you turn in your bracket in the office pool, next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. It's caught. This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and touchdown Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson. Harbaugh back to throw over the middle, caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet, touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good. He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan, but Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler. And here's your first play. Pressure coming, second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic. Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. This is March. The madness is officially upon us, and we're going to have a full breakdown of Michigan's draw, why I think it's the most favorable draw we could have asked for. Sparty can have Detroit. I would take our draw over theirs in a heartbeat. We'll break all of that down. Look at Michigan's potential opening weekend opponents, Montana, Houston, San Diego State out there in Wichita, with Michael Spath of WTKA in Ann Arbor. He'll be joining us a little bit later on in this episode. But we begin by taking a broader look at the NCAA tournament. And this episode is for you, the people. This is my attempt to help you win your office pool with some analytics that helped me finish in the top 1% of ESPN.com's bracket challenge last year, which maybe it was a fluke, but maybe it wasn't. When I correctly predicted North Carolina to beat Gonzaga in the final, only missed the score by 3 points, many of those same analytics I'm now going to use to help all of you watching us here this week on YouTube. By the way, can you maybe click a like on this video? Feel free to share the link, subscribe to our channel if you don't mind. Or if you're listening to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, same thing. If you could give us a like, a positive review, maybe subscribe on our podcast channels, we would greatly appreciate that. That's one way you can show us your appreciation for what I'm about to share with you. I'm not selfish. I believe in sharing the knowledge the universe has blessed me with. So let us begin. Some data points you want to know, including here's what the really smart guys think, the guys in Vegas. If you look at what they believe the Final Four would be in terms of the top seeded team or the top odds in each region, they think the Final Four will be two number 1 seeds, Virginia and Villanova, a number 2 seed in Duke, and that number 3 seed, number 3 in the seed, number 1 in our hearts, the beloved Michigan Wolverines. So that's what the smartest guys in the desert think will be the Final Four in San Antonio in the next few weeks. ESPN's 2017 BPI correctly predicted the national championship, Gonzaga and North Carolina. This year, it is predicting Villanova and Virginia. Will it nail it 2 years in a row? We will find out. No team since Indiana in 1987 has won the NCAA tournament without an eventual first-round NBA draft pick. So, yeah, in the end, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes more so than the X's and the O's. Virginia is the fourth team ever to be unranked in the preseason AP poll and become a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. All three previous teams, including Larry Bird's 1979 Indiana State squad, all three previous ones made it to the Final Four. Something to consider. For the first time ever, no lower-seeded teams were favored in the opening lines released out in Vegas of the first round, which means Vegas agreed with the seeding overall that the selection committee came out with this year. Now let's look at how this typically breaks down traditionally if you want to look at the metrics. Round by round. In the very first round, remember, no 16 seed has ever won. And, you know, what we've seen in recent years is that the scoring margins between the 1 and the 16s are getting wider. You know, you go back to Murray State, Michigan State, Western Carolina, and Purdue, the most famous example. Princeton losing 50-49 to Georgetown in 1989. But we were routinely for a while there seeing 16 seeds challenging number one seeds. We don't see that very often, but we could see it this year. Penn, as a 16 seed against number one seed Kansas, is the smallest underdog of any number 16 seed since 2006. But still, it's never happened in history that a 16 has beaten a 1. In fact, even number 2 seeds don't lose in the first round very often. Only 8 number 2 seeds ever have lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Now, let's look at the round of 32. 88% of number 1 seeds have advanced to the Sweet 16 past the round of 32. Almost half of the number 12 seeds that win in round 1 also win in that round 2. So here's what that means. If you're going to pick a 12, 5-12 has become one of the hot button upset lines in a lot of office pools. Well, if you're picking a 12 to beat a 5, pick him to win the next to go to the next round too, because it happens about half of the time. Also, at least one double-digit seed has made the Sweet 16 in 31 of the last 33 years, so don't pick all chalk there. Only once in 33 years have all top 3 seeds made it to the Sweet 16. Keep that in mind. Less than 10% of the teams to ever make it past this round were seeded lower than 12th. Now, a couple things about this metric point. The reason why 33 years is the barometer here, because it was 1985 when the tournament expanded to 64 teams, and that's sort of been the modern trend line when looking at these trends. Also, the reason the 12 line matters is because several years ago, the NCAA went to the system of the play-in games. And so the last few at-large teams in, they have a play-in game in Dayton as well. So it used to be you could even get at-large teams that were a number 13 seed. You don't get that anymore. And so that's why you see a massive drop-off after number 12, because the at-large teams don't get seeded any lower than 12th. And then after that, you're into more of the smaller conferences. So yes, pick a double-digit seed to get to the Sweet 16. No, do not pick a team seeded lower than 12th, though, to get to the Sweet 16. Now, when we get to the regional semifinals or the Sweet 16, here are some trends to keep in mind. About 70% of number 1 seeds all time make it past this round to the Elite 8. To put that in perspective, that is a higher percentage than number 5 seeds have ever even won a single game. Think about that. Only one team seeded worse than 11 has ever made it past this round and to the Elite 8, and that was LSU as an 11 seed in 1986. They went on to the Final Four, by the way. In the Elite 8, 26 of the last 33 years, only 1 or 2 number 1 seeds have made it to the Final Four. Only 4 of the last 156, that's a trend, only 4 of the last 156 Final Four teams have been seeded lower than a 9. Here's what that means. Don't pick all chalk to get to the Final Four, but don't go all cray-cray either. Balance, Obi-Wan. As St. Paul would say, in all things, including bracket madness, moderation. Next trend line as we now go to the Final Four. Only twice in the last 33 years has a team lower than 6th as a seed made it to the national title game. That was Villanova as an 8 seed in 1985, Connecticut as a 7 seed in 2011. So a lot of times when you get those Cinderellas, those 9, 10 seeds that make it this far, they run into reality. Midnight strikes on Cinderella in the national semifinals. Back to the Final Four for just a second. There was one more trend there that I want to cite. 2 number 1 seeds. Now, when I say seeding, the NCAA has seeded the 1 or 2 seeds almost from the very beginning. But full seeding all the way through the bracket didn't begin until 1979. All right, so keep that in mind with the trend I'm about to share with you. Since full seeding began in 1979, 2 number 1 seeds have squared off for the national title only 8 times. Now, it happened last year with Gonzaga and North Carolina. But that's only the 8th time since 1979 that 2 number 1 seeds have played for the national championship. So again, going all the way with chalk doesn't work any more than picking the craziest, nuttiest bracket does. And then when we get to the national championship game, 28 of the last 29 national champions, that's a trend, by the way, 28 of the last 29 national champions were a 4 seed or higher, the one exception, Connecticut, as a 7th seed in 2011. 28 out of 29. Couple more things here that you're going to want to take a look at. My first round upsets. These are teams I like to pull the upset in the first round. I like San Diego State over Houston, Oklahoma over Rhode Island. I think everybody telling Oklahoma they don't belong in all week long is going to fire them up. I like Charleston over Auburn, a team that is injury depleted, and they just played at the end of the year like they were kind of out of gas. I like New Mexico State. That's one of my 12-5s there over Clemson. And I like Arizona State to win its play-in game and then beat TCU in the first round. Round of 32 upsets. I like Miami over Tennessee. Missouri, yes, I know one of Miami's key players is hurt, but he's been out for a month and a half. They're not telling you that. He was gone when they beat North Carolina in Chapel Hill a couple weeks ago. I like Missouri to upset number 1 seeded Xavier. I like them apples. A&M over North Carolina. Guys, only 3 times ever have every number 2 seed made it out of the first weekend. All right, so I like A&M with 3 bigs, and one of them a lock as an NBA first-round draft pick to beat North Carolina. I like Florida over Texas Tech. The last 5 times Florida's been in the NCAA tournament, they've at least made it to the Elite 8. And I like New Mexico State to beat College of Charleston and be that double-digit seed, that number 12 seed. We told you there's always one that gets to the Sweet 16. In the East Regional, these are my Final Four picks. I like Purdue to beat Villanova. I think Isaac Haas, a tough matchup for the Wildcats. In the Midwest Regional, I like Duke over Kansas. In the South, I like Virginia to beat dark horse Miami. And in the West Regional, wouldn't that be something? Remember in 92, Michigan, Ohio State played in Lexington for the regional final and the chance to go to the Final Four? I think they do it again in the West Regional, and the Wolverines get back to the Final Four. My Final Four, I think Virginia's defense is too tough for Michigan, and I think Duke beats Purdue, and then I think Duke will cut down the nets and win the national championship. Everybody keeps saying, yeah, but they don't play any defense. They're 7th in the nation adjusted defensive efficiency. That's pretty good. And here's one more trend for you. 13 of the last 14 national champions have had blue as one of their team colors. 13 of the last 14. I think that trend continues. Duke and Virginia, by the way, both have blue in their colors, but I've got Duke beating Virginia. I've got a Big Ten ACC Challenge Final Four. Michigan, Purdue out of the Big Ten, Virginia and Duke out of the ACC. And finally, a little reconciliation. Remember last week I unveiled my one and only bracketology that I published 2 weeks before Selection Sunday to show how overrated these guys are before any conference tournament games are played, right? Well, the final tally is in. I got 54 of the 68 teams right. In my one and only bracketology I released on February 25th. That's right around 80%. I got 84% last year. However, 13 of the 14 teams I got wrong were automatics from one-bid leagues. I got 35 out of 36 at-large teams correct. The only one I missed was USC, and I did that 2 weeks before the brackets came out. All these brackets, and by the way, this is nothing to brag about, okay? Any of you that can read the RPI read KenPom, BPI, that can Google future schedules. You could sit here and do every bit as good as I did, if not better, with the same information. These bracketologists, Lenardi and these guys, it's overrated. I mean, of course you're going to get most of these right on Selection Sunday. When your final bracket comes out 5 minutes before the actual bracket, you already know half of the teams because 32 of them are automatics. You pretty much know 95% of the at-large teams. So you're really just trying to figure out who the last 2, 3, or 4 teams in are. So there you go. It's not that hard. Apparently, you know what is hard, though? Putting together a selection show. CBS, what the hell was that? Whatever they put on Turner for that Selection Sunday show, that was the Star Wars holiday special of shows. It was dreck. It was dreadful. It was inhumane. Do we have to just screw everything up in America today? Do we have to look at everything that's fixed and break it? Do we have to? This is one of the few things we've got left as a people. March Madness, we just all love together, regardless of how we vote, whether we vote at all, how much we care, whether we care at all. It's one of the few things that brings America together again. And Turner absolutely defecated on it on Sunday with that abomination of a program. Everyone involved in that should be fired and never permitted to work in television again. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and there's a look at our Patreon page. And if you stop right there for just a second, you'll notice that while we were off last week, I put together a podcast. 4 weeks till Selection Sunday, where Michigan basketball stands. And that kind of was able to tide you over while we took a 1 week hiatus since signing day. And if you're one of the folks that is supporting us on Patreon, you got to take advantage of that. You got to listen to that. And we greatly appreciate your support. I know a lot of you ask us, hey, what can we do to get more content from you guys? Well, keep in mind, we are taking time away from the stuff that actually feeds our families to put this together as a labor of love every single week. And so if there is a group of you out there that says, hey, we really support what you're doing, we want more of it, this is one surefire way to get us to open up more of our schedule to produce even more content. And plus, if you're a Patreon supporter, you get access to exclusive content separate from what we put out here for free on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube every week as well. So check us out. Check us out at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All right, let's zero in specifically now on our beloved Michigan Wolverines. Joining us to talk about Michigan's draw in the 2018 NCAA tournament, our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Michael, it's good to have you with us, brother. How are you?
You know, it's March Madness time, and the madness extends beyond basketball right now into my life. But it's buying a house, and I'm just crazy. But it's a good kind of crazy, Steve. I'm sure you've been down that road before, and you're just making the most out of it. But I tell you what, I am geeked, absolutely geeked about Michigan basketball. Cannot wait for this tournament to get started.
Well, let's begin with this. First of all, your immediate reaction when you saw the draw Michigan received on Sunday, and then how your opinion may or may not have evolved in the several days leading up to Thursday night's tip-off about that draw.
Well, at first, I think like a lot of people, there was the I don't want to say gut punch. I don't think that's the right phrase, but you know, the almost like the outrage that Michigan State was going to be playing in Little Caesars Arena in Detroit, and Michigan was going to Wichita, and you're like, come on, this is crap, this isn't fair. Where's the justice in this? Michigan beats them twice, and you know, their resumes were pretty equal, or maybe Michigan's even slightly better. But at the end of the day, when I look at it, you know, what Michigan State has to go through to get to the Final Four, to get to the national championship, I kind of started laughing a little bit because Duke is Tom Izzo's kryptonite. They'd have to go through Kansas. They've got a really tough draw, I have to say. And when you look at Michigan, you know, I know that Houston is a dangerous team, is a potential second-round opponent. North Carolina walloped Michigan earlier in the year. Now, certainly those two teams have changed significantly since then. But if you can get past, I mean, that's a lot to do, but if you can get past a couple of those games, all of a sudden you look at the upper half of the bracket, and I like where Michigan's at. The only thing I don't like, honestly, Steve, is Wichita. Is being to Wichita, you know, talking to my producer and co-host Zach Shaw a little bit this week, just how difficult it is to get to Wichita, and the fact that for a Michigan fandom that travels just about everywhere, that is one of the harder places to get to. And so the crowd that they enjoyed in New York City probably will not be as pro-maize and blue this weekend in Wichita.
Well, the Wolverines are going to open up against the champions of the Big Sky, Montana, on Thursday night. And for folks that don't know, Montana was on the wrong end of what I thought might have been the greatest dunk I've ever seen in live action.
Oh, my God.
Did you see that clip? I mean, that looked like something out of NBA Jam or Double Dribble when we were kids. I could not believe someone pulled that off in real time of a major Division I college basketball game. But despite that highlight play, Montana won that game and went on to win the Big Sky Conference. What do you know about our opening round opponent, Michael?
You know, I was listening to Zach today talk about them, and the thing that stands out to me, both about Montana and about Houston, who most people are pegging as Michigan's second-round opponent if they beat Montana, is just that these teams are much more active with their hands, much more active in terms of fouling opponents than, say, Michigan is used to. And what's going to be really interesting about this opening week of college basketball for the Wolverines is that what you could find yourself in a scenario is you could find Michigan on the free throw line a lot more frequently than they have been going to the free throw line in the first 35 minutes of a game. The last 5 minutes, teams have been fouling Michigan and trying to, Purdue did it almost. If they had Purdue had 2 more minutes in that Big Ten tournament championship, they might have found a way, but teams have been waiting until late. Well, now you've got a team where Michigan could be going to the line, especially if they're aggressive, a lot earlier in the game, and I wonder if that's a good thing or a bad thing for Michigan, because if you have to sacrifice, would I rather have another possession with the ball in their hands for Charles Matthews or for Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman? Would I rather have those guys at the free throw line? Well, besides Marr, there's not a lot of guys that I'd like to have at the free throw line, him and Duncan Robinson. I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic. Is this one of those moments where all of us are pulling our hair out because of the fact that Michigan doesn't shoot free throws very well, and these are two teams that foul a lot and are pretty physical.
And this is the game when we're going to find out really the rust factor. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about this because of the Big Ten holding its conference tournament a week early in order to, get itself inserted into Madison Square Garden. But if no Big Ten teams make the Final Four, it's going to have nothing to do with this layoff. This opening round game is where the layoff factor, I think, matters, because after this, you turn right around 48 hours later and play again. And so you're warmed up, you're heated, you're ready to go if you win this game. This is where the rust factor for Michigan, for Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State, I think it's much more of a factor here than it will be from this point going forward.
And not only is it rust, Steve, as you know this, but Michigan playing at 9:50 at night or thereabouts on Thursday night, so we're going to have to wait around all day long. That's not a place that John Beilein is comfortable with. It's not a place that his team is comfortable with. I mean, they've had to wait already for, 10 days between games, and now on the 11th day, instead of just getting going and playing at noon, they're going to sit with their thoughts. And meanwhile, Montana just recently played, and Montana, this is a more desirable time for them. It's, I think it's, they'd be playing they're 2 hours behind, so they'd be playing at like 7:50 their time. So it makes a lot of sense for Montana. And you're right. I agree with you that after you get past this first game, I mean, the rust is gone. The one positive is that if you look at the Big Ten teams, you've got 2 seeds, you've got a 3 seed, you've got a 5 seed. So in at least the first game, all the Big Ten teams are favored by a pretty good chunk of change. And so if you can get past those scary 2-15 matchups, 3-14 matchups, then you should be in good standing for Friday or for Saturday and Sunday. And, man, I tell you what, Steve, I'm already envisioning the only time I'm ever allowed to wear green is on St. Patrick's Day, and yet all I would wear on that day would be maize and blue to cheer for the maize and blue.
Michael Spath from WTKA, our guest here on Michigan Podcast. When I was sitting around and, when your team's off for 11 days, you're automatically in, you've got some time to ponder some things. And when I was sitting around looking at the bracket, a couple of things I wanted us to avoid. I had a feeling we were going to be a 3 seed. Historically, teams with our resume are never seeded lower than that, so I thought we'd get a 3. I wanted us to avoid Bucknell, who's got a history of pulling off 14-3 upsets, and they have size, multiple bigs, and experience, so the moment would not be too big for them. I wanted us to avoid Bucknell as a 14, and we did, although we're learning today one of Bucknell's best big men is actually suspended now for that opening round game against Michigan State. But that was on my wish list. The next thing on my wish list was to not be in a bracket with Duke or Virginia, particularly if Virginia had 3 or 4 days, if we were the first team they played, where they could really figure out how to apply their pack line defense to Beeline's offense. I think it's a much more difficult adjustment on one day in the second game. But if we were going to have to face them in a regional semifinal, I was or have them in the way of a Final Four. I didn't like that matchup, nor Duke. And the reason why with Duke, very few teams in college basketball these days have one skilled big man. They have two, and they can put them on the floor at the same time. And here's why that matters. When you watch Michigan State, Jaren Jackson is talented, but he's not skilled. He's got two methods of scoring: 3-point shots and putbacks. He is not a guy you give the ball to, and he doesn't Ethan Happ you in the lane. With Duke, you've got Wendell Carter, you've got Marvin Bagley, and so that mitigates the Mo Wagner factor, because you can't bring both of those 20 feet from the basket. One of those guys gets to stay under the rim and defend the rim against our penetrators. We didn't get lined up with them. So I loved our draw. North Carolina is not what North Carolina has been. Now, let me rephrase that. I'm not saying they're not good. But this isn't a North Carolina team that rolls 3-4 guys that are 6'9" or bigger. They're much more of a perimeter-oriented team. Even Cam Johnson, who is 6'7", 6'8", he's really a jump shooter. This is not the kind of North Carolina team that can just maul you up front. In fact, their second-round opponent, Texas A&M, they're that kind of team. They got 3 really talented big guys. One of them that's considered a borderline lottery pick, ranked higher than anybody North Carolina is going to put in the draft this coming June. So when I saw our draw and that we checked every box that was on my I hope we don't end up with that list, I was ecstatic. I would trade our draw with Sparty and Detroit every day and twice on Sunday.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, when you do the numbers and you look at whether you want to use RPI as a comparative point, you want to use KenPom, some of the advanced metrics.
KenPom thinks Xavier is the third best team in our region behind us in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, which is just crazy. So exactly. So you have the weakest number 1 seed among the 4 1 seeds, and you have, I think, the second weakest number 2 seed among the number 2 seeds, and it might actually be the lowest number 2 seed according to KenPom in North Carolina. So you're in a position where you can feel pretty good about, as you said, Michigan, if they can get to the Sweet 16, if they can get past North Carolina. You and I disagree a little bit on North Carolina. I know that you say that Michigan matches up with them, and that you would have a longer time of frame to get ready. I just think sometimes, Steve, when you got in your butt kicked by somebody, it's one thing to lose to that team by 4 or 5 points. You're salivating about the opportunity to play them again. But when you get your butt handed to you, that doubt can creep in a little bit in the back of your mind and say, hey, are we good enough to hang with these guys? Now, Michigan has come so far since then, and their defense today is significantly better than what it was when they put North Carolina back in November. But still, in the back of your mind a little bit, I mean, I'll tell you as an athlete myself, when I play someone and I haven't, and if they walloped me pretty good, I'm thinking about that a little bit before that game, and sometimes that can impact you.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. But when I look back at the North Carolina game, and obviously if both of us advance, we'll have a ton to talk about next week leading up to that game in the Sweet 16. But on November 29th, I went back and looked at that game again. E.B. Watson played as many minutes as Xavier Simpson. Eli Brooks was the starting point guard. We were still primarily running the offense through Charles Matthews at that point. North Carolina was also coming home after their worst shooting performance in the history of their program, the previous game against Michigan State. We were a different team. It was a terrible spot. In many respects, it's like there's another game we lost like that this year. Nebraska. We caught them at the exact worst time, played them on the road, and they blew us out. Now, obviously, North Carolina is better than Nebraska, but we've sort of faced that specter of the team that owned us and the way we responded against Nebraska in the Big Ten tournament. This is virtually the same North Carolina team with the addition of Cam Johnson, who's a double-digit scorer. doesn't play any defense. In fact, I think we're about 30 spots higher than North Carolina in Ken Palm's defensive efficiency ratings. North Carolina is one of the leading rebounding teams, but it's not based on size. It's something Roy Williams emphasizes as a coach and is really good at it. Now, we're one of the best. We're probably the best defensive rebounding team that Beeline has had. I think Joel Berry is a tremendous point guard. He's taken his team to a national championship game 2 years in a row. I think we have more perimeter quickness defensively in Xavier Simpson than we've had maybe since Gary Grant, and that's going back 30 years at Michigan. And Xavier Simpson was a non-factor when we played that team back in November. So, man, I hope North Carolina, if we play them in the Sweet 16, I hope they watch a lot of that game. I hope that they think everything you're just thinking, because we're a dramatically different team than we were on November the 29th.
No, you make a lot of great points, and it'll be a different game, and I certainly like Michigan's chances in that game. And if we all remember, the first 10 minutes of that game where Michigan was going toe-to-toe with them, the problem was in that game, Steve, and why you should feel better about Michigan's chances now is that Michigan nor North Carolina played a lick of defense in the first 10 minutes of that game. And then Michigan started missing some shots, but still weren't playing any defense, and North Carolina was making theirs. And the next thing you knew was a 20, 30-point game. So Michigan doesn't play defense like they did then. This is arguably the best defensive team in John Beilein's career with the Wolverines, and that's gonna keep them in every game. And in fact, when people say to me they're a little bit scared about Montana, they're a little bit scared about Houston, and Michigan benefited from luck when they played Michigan State and Purdue that they missed open shots. I get all that, but this team plays defense. This team plays with a tenacity. They're aggressive on the boards. They're not going to be giving up a lot of those second chance points. It really this whole tournament. I honestly believe this, Steve. Michigan's chances of this tournament are going to come down to how well they shoot free throws.
Agreed.
Because I think you're going to get into these games in the first two rounds where you're getting fouled a little bit more often. You're playing North Carolina. It's a tight game. Why would North Carolina in a tight game at the end not just foul Xavier Simpson, not just foul Charles Matthews, not just foul Mo Wagner? And if that's the way that they've got to win, I mean, here's the thing. During the regular season, you might not follow those guys because it's the regular season. At tournament time, and all you're trying to do is survive in advance, it doesn't make a difference. You don't give a damn if it's pretty. All you need to do is win by 1 point.
Yep.
They're going to employ that strategy. And if Michigan can't shoot free throws at the clip that it's at now, since February, which is 69%, they're going to be bounced in the second round. They're going to be bounced in the Sweet 16. They're not going all the way if they don't shoot free throws well.
Agree with that completely. One angle I think that's being undervalued, San Diego State is a proud program. Our former coach, Steve Fisher, went out there after NCAA banishment and really built a program that in many years was in the top 25 nationally, was an NCAA tournament regular. I would say whatever that, next notch below a Gonzaga from a prominent mid-major program, that's what he built San Diego State into. He retired last year. His top assistant, who was one of his top assistants for many years at Michigan, Brian Dutcher, is now the head coach there, and we could face them in the second round. Wouldn't that be a little serendipity there? That's something I've not seen enough people talking about, Michael.
No, and you're right. And, I mean, that's the thing that's beautiful about the tournament, which is also what scares the hell out of you about the tournament, is here we are talking about Michigan playing Houston and then Michigan playing North Carolina. And I mean, you know this so well, Steve, as I do. We're saying right now we're expecting the top team in the first game, the top team in the second game, the top team in the third game to all end up meeting together. How often does that happen? It's really kind of scary to think about the fact that it doesn't happen very often. And so San Diego State could be a great surprise.
Yep.
Could be that team that just throws everything into – and before we sit there and go like, well, if they end up playing San Diego State, that's a good opportunity for Michigan. Well, guess what? San Diego State got there by beating a really good team. So I love this time of the year, as we all do. But I know you listen to the show, Steve, and you hear us talk about this a little bit on Monday's show about having expectations. I think you can expect to get to the Sweet 16 because you're the favored team in both games you play. But anything after that is such a crapshoot because of how crazy March Madness is. And it's why we love it when it's every other team but you, and why we hate it when it's your team.
Case in point of what you just said, I think it's only 3 times since the tournament went to 64 teams in 85, so the last 33 years. I think it's only 3 times all top 3 seeds made it to the Sweet 16, and we know it didn't happen last year because Michigan beat Louisville in the second round when they were a number 2 seed, or sorry, a number 3 seed. All right, so Michael, final question is really more of an observation, your reaction to it. 7 schools in the country can now say that in football they've gone to a bowl game the last 2 years in a row, and in basketball they've gone to the men's basketball tournament 2 years in a row. Only one of those 7 schools is from the Big Ten, and that lone Big Ten school on that list is Michigan. Your thoughts?
No, that's awesome. I mean, it really is, and I know it's a little disappointing because football has been to back-to-back, and they've lost back-to-back. But the fact of the matter is that we really are, I truly believe this, on the precipice of one of the greatest eras of Michigan basketball, football, and I'm going to throw in there because of the job he's done in his first year with the Michigan hockey team, of hockey. I mean, you go back to probably like 96, 97, 98, when you had football winning the national title, hockey won national titles in 96 and 98, and basketball wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. I mean, you've never had all 3 teams be truly special all at the same time. And Steve, I mean, your stat is so crazy. If you were to throw in there, make the NCAA tournament in hockey in the same year too, I mean, there's probably 1 team in the country that's done that, and that's the University of Michigan. So I'm really excited about where we are as fans. Jim Harbaugh's got to dial it up. I still think, as you do too, that he will, and it should get better from here on out, and that the 8-5 season will be the low point, hopefully, for Michigan football. But God, what a great time to be a Michigan fan, especially on the basketball side with what they're doing, and John Beilein sticking around for foreseeable future. I think we're going to be talking about a national championship in one of those 3 sports in the next 3 years.
Well, you go back to the 2014-15 academic year, and that was the first time, I think, since pre-Red Berenson at Michigan that football didn't go to a bowl game in the final year of Brady Hoke 2014, and hockey and men's basketball there in 2015 did not make the NCAA tournament. And now look where we are now, where basketball is coming off back-to-back Big Ten tournament championships, a number 3 seed. They win 2 games. They have a rare 30-win season at Michigan. We've mentioned how much the football program has been repaired, and then already the job that Mel Pearson has done with the hockey program. And that season of discontent in 2014-15, it seems like it was a long time ago, brother, in a galaxy far, far away. Michael, it is good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us again here on Michigan Podcast.
Thanks, guys, for having me, as always.
All right, take care. More Michigan Podcast in a moment. We asked you on Twitter this week, how far will Michigan go in the NCAA tournament? 36% of you said the Sweet 16. That was the most popular answer, but opinions were pretty divided. 25% said the Elite 8. 25% said the Final Four. 14% of you, which is what I think, the Final Four, 14% of you believe it's the national championship. And I think we're all rooting for you 14% to be correct. That brings us to our question of the week here on Michigan Podcast. And it comes from Dane Don, love that name, who asks, why is Purdue a number 2 and Michigan a number 3? Well, Dane, because the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee said so. Oh, I know you're probably expecting more of an answer than that. It was actually a Sparty Twitter account that sent this data point out. Michigan State wins the regular season in the Big Ten. Michigan wins the Big Ten tournament, and yet they're both 3 seeds and Purdue's a 2. Explain that. And you know what? I really can't, but I'd also rather have our draw than Purdue's. I'm much more interested in the draw than I am in the seed, and I even am in the location. So when you're not a number 1 seed, and we weren't, and we didn't have the resume to be, you don't really get to dictate any shots whatsoever. So you're at the mercy of someone else's graciousness. And I think we got more than the benefit of the doubt. When you look at our total draw, what I like about Houston is their big scorer is a guy in the backcourt. I think we have really good quickness in our perimeter defense and Xavier Simpson. When I look at San Diego State, that's a team that would not have been in the tournament if they didn't play their way in. So I think we're clearly superior to them. When I look at North Carolina, I don't think the game we lost to them on November the 29th has any bearing at all. First of all, they didn't have Cam Johnson. Secondly, we're not even close to the same team. I mean, E.B. Watson played as many minutes as Xavier Simpson did in that game, guys. Okay? I mean, we were still playing Eli Brooks at point guard. We were still running the offense through Charles Matthews. Duncan Robinson wasn't the complete player. We may lose to North Carolina if we face them, but I don't think North Carolina will make the Sweet 16. But we may lose to them if we face them, but it won't have anything to do with what we saw on November the 29th. And I'd much rather be opposite Carolina than Duke. What scares me about Duke is they can put multiple skilled big men on the floor, which negates the Mo Wagner advantage, because Wagner can only take one big man at a time away from the basket. If you've got a second one, that really cuts down on our ability to attack the rim with dribble penetration, which is our biggest offensive asset. All right, so I'm ecstatic we're not in Carolina or in Duke's bracket. Carolina doesn't have multiple skilled big men. They're actually a perimeter-oriented team this year. They don't have the kind of size they've had in the past, and Gonzaga hasn't played in the kind of conference that we played in. So again, these are all really good teams. We could lose to even San Diego State. All the teams I mentioned, everybody's good now. Okay, everybody's good. But the best you can ask for is a favorable draw that if you do what you're supposed to do, you can take advantage of. And I think we have that. And now we just wait and see whether or not we can take advantage of it. Want to thank all of you that make this possible every single week, including our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast who help to spread the word. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast throughout the course of the week, and we keep you updated on our thoughts, everything Michigan and Big Ten sports related there. I will have, after each one of Michigan's NCAA tournament games, for our Patreon subscribers and supporters, I will have instant reaction podcasts to every single one of those games. So make sure you are hooked up with us at patreon.com/Michigan. Want to thank Michael Spath for joining us as well. Let the madness begin. Go Blue.